So I think what's quite nice is that we've actually now got a name for this little series, which is Trait Talking.
Very
Do
good.
you feel like that's sort of clear enough what we're referring to, or do you think that's just us being very sort of aware of what traits are because we work for FitnessGenes?
Our recondite knowledge of traits means that we believe everyone else understands. I think people will understand it if
So
we
do
do say
you
so
mind,
ourselves.
yeah, just in case, do you mind just explaining sort of like what a trait is and just
And what talking is.
yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So a trait is a biological characteristic, basically. Something as simple as height, weight, eye color. They're sort of more sort of famous in the textbooks, but yet it's a measurable component of that is a biological outcome. And traits can be combined, caused by genetic factors and also by non-genetic factors. So height is highly heritable, which means your height is very much predisposed by your genetics. However, if you're undernourished, you are not going to get to your maximum height potential. So there's a simple example of how genetics and your environment interact to create a trait. And then the trait has a distribution of outcomes, which can be continuous like height or discrete like eye color, for example.
So that's, and effectively that's what we call our reports, our traits, because of
A
that.
trait, yeah. So our traits, our reports will be description of a small component of your biology, a lot of which are linked to risks of certain conditions, and then we give information on how you can mitigate those risks.
And it's a play on trait talking, just to explain that a step further as well.
Oh, the fact we're having to really explain this now suggests to me that it's a terrible name. It's all these jokes you have to over-explain.
We'll put a pin in it, but I think it works for now. But I mean, traits aren't what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk today about kind of the longevity movement, and this is something that kind of seeing more and more of, especially across sort of social media and that type of thing. But there was that paper that you shared with me this week by the Max Planck Institute that I thought was really interesting in terms of, the claims being made by these, I guess, longevity gurus are in a way kind of wildly exaggerated. So, it's a booming industry, a lot of investment in terms of, the research going into it. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of just get your thoughts as to the movement in general. And also, your comments on sort of like the findings of the Max Planck Institute and the report they produced as well.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, I think I was really brought to the attention of the longevity movement probably over a decade ago, where a fellow called Aubrey de Grey, who's one of the big proponents of this movement, gave a presentation at Oxford. We all left the lab and went there for the evening pre-pub, which is always something we used to do. And gave his presentation, and I remember distinctly he said that the first person to live to 1,000 is alive today. So this was 10 years ago. So they've got 990 years left to live. And I remember at the time thinking, what a load of bollocks. But as time has gone on, we see more and more of you've alluded to of these movements and businesses and research groups that are really looking at longevity and really seeing how we can extend our longevity beyond 100, 150, 200. I think 1,000 is a bit of a stretch.
I was going to say that seems like quite a jump from the claims being made and then up to 1,000, right?
I think maybe that was to wake us up in the middle of his talk. I'm not quite sure, but anyway, but still, there's the great. There's a lot of enthusiasm for people living to 100, 200 quite easily. Now, the paper you've just alluded to kind of pours cold water on that. It very much pushes away at that optimism, and it was saying actually to extend beyond the age sort of ranges we have in terms of survival at this moment in time, to go beyond really the life expectancies of sort of mid-80s is a big stretch. And the way they did this was by looking at long-living groups of individuals. So they were performing the study from about 1990, and they finished the study in 2019 for the obvious COVID reasons of that will impact their data. And they're specifically looking at groups of individuals that are known to live long periods of time. So they're looking at people from Italy, France, Hong Kong, I think South Korea, Japan, Switzerland, and then I think they used the USA as an outlier, just to normalise their data. And then they looked at the increase in these groups, and they showed that the increase was slowing down. They did show that lifespan inequality was declining and mortality was getting more contracted, so people weren't dying younger, so there's positives from the data, but they were showing that the rate of the increase of life expectancy, the improvement in life expectancy, was going down. And then using mathematical modelling, they then tried to predict by the end of this century how many people they think are going to live to the age of 100. So not 1,000, not 150 to 100. And so using this extrapolation of the data, they predicted that only 15% of females would, and 5% of males would be living to 100. So in terms of the great champions of the longevity movement, this is a bit of a downgrading. However, even that, if you think about, I think there's about 0.02 to 3% of our population that's 100 or over. So in terms of policy, in economic terms, that's still a huge amount of people that are going to be at that age. But in terms of the great promise of us all knocking around in our hundreds, going on saga cruises, I think it's less of it is very much a downgrading of what the opinion was being delivered by these longevity guys, or is, should I say.
So why do you think there is such a discrepancy in terms of what people are suggesting and then what the research has found effectively?
So again, first things first, let's think about the paper. The paper is there is pessimism in the paper because, of course, we could have this great biological breakthrough where we reduce some great hallmark of aging. Also, the cohorts they're using, they could be not the best representative cohorts. There's obviously going to be heterogeneity in the cohorts. There may be individuals within that cohort that could be living for longer. But again, a lot of the research suggests that we have a ceiling of about 120. So I think 121 is the oldest documented individual. And we think going beyond that. But again, in terms of you think about how population distributions and mortality distributions look, everyone doesn't get to 120 and dies. Most people are going to be dying. Well, most people are dying in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and very few get. So you've really got to extend the health and the longevity of the population as a whole to really be shifting that bar towards 15, 20, 30, 40% of us reaching 100 and beyond. In terms of I guess the next thing, am I an optimist or a pessimist? I think I hate to say I'm more on the pessimistic side, and this is not to undermine the great work that's been performed in understanding disease biology. So think about cancer, dementia, cardiovascular disease. There's so much great work that's going there that can protect people from these diseases. But what we're really defining here is, can we extend our biology? Or have we evolved to live for that longer period of time? Or is the ability to unpick our biology so we can going beyond what is our biological constraints at this moment in time allow us to do it? I'm very much of the thinking that we are constrained by our biology, and the individuals that are thinking of aging as kind of a disease that we just need to take a few pills or open a few gateways of growth or autophagy or neuroprotection, we're going to be fine for another 50 to 100 years. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
And why do you think that is, in terms of, I guess what I'm sort of struggling to understand is there some sort of motivation for kind of promoting this ideal, or this idea that we're able to kind of extend through certain methods? Is there something, I don't want to be cynical myself, but in terms of, marketing and selling sort of certain products and services to people on this idea that they can extend their lifespan by X number of years, do you think there's other sort of factors at play here?
Well, I think the great motivation is being human and not wanting to die. So, so I think we all have that innate motivation to survive. And generally, yeah, if you live in Silicon Valley and you're incredibly wealthy and you can control a lot of the world, then you probably want to hang around for a bit longer too. So there's all the conflicts of interests and the motivations that any other human being is sensitive to, for sure. There are, and you find this a lot in biology, where you can study a particular pathway and you can go, okay, well, oh, that's really interesting. So actually, if we increase or decrease this gene expression, or if we change this process in the cell, we have a Drosophila fruit fly model or a mouse model living for an extra 20, 30, 40%. And that's, oh my God, we can do this in humans. But these experiments are incredibly constrained, and they're not, the mice are on a single type of food, social interaction is minimum, there's very little environmental heterogeneity or stochastic events. They're just kept in a cage and very little occurs. So it's not very representative of the real world. But I think when you can describe and see how one trait impacts your longevity, but actually if you start to think about it from a biological perspective, and when you look at multiple traits, actually it's very difficult to optimize all the things in your body in one time. So I think, if you think about sort of strength versus speed, something very trivial like that, but the stronger, the more time you spend lifting weights, the less it's going to have an impact on your ability to run fast marathons, for example. There's a simple trade-off. You can look in the animal kingdom, that the adaptations in the animal kingdom, comparing fish to birds is kind of the glib one. But those adaptations exist so you can benefit within or succeed within an environment. So within all those adaptations, there are trade-offs. Now, if you think about biology and aging, you're going to have the same trade-offs. Think about something like height. The taller you are, the more likely, or you have an increased risk of cancer. Why is this? Well, there's more cell divisions and there's more cell growth. So the more cell divisions you have, the more DNA replication events you have, the more likely to bear new mutations. So there's a simple trade-off there. You can think about growth and fertility as well. And I guess more broadly, so the longevity movement, very much, it's kind of an exceptionalist movement where we can create the perfect human. And there's just no perfect human. We can see it in nature with animals, as we've just described. And actually the fact that a lot of the genes in our body that may make us successful early in life actually may be the ones causing disease later in life as well. So let's talk about, we talked about ApoE on a previous podcast. Now, ApoE, as we've described before, causes, well, ApoE, the 4 version, if you're homozygous, increases your risk massively of dementia. Now, why do you think that, question to you, Alex, why do you think that variance still exists within the population?
Way of controlling population growth.
That's not the. I think that's very interesting, but actually that has not been studied. But actually, aging in itself can be a developmental paradigm. So that's a very interesting. I kind of like that. See, there you go. You need to write that into a grant and see if you can get funded to study that. So there's a prime example. But you think about, this is the disease of aging. So we've already passed on our genes before we get dementia. So there's something called the selection shadow. So actually the detrimental effect of having ApoE4 is not seen until after we've passed on our genes. So it's not having that negative effect. But more interestingly, ApoE4 carriers are shown to have a reduction in childhood infection, a reduction in the incidence rate and aggressiveness of melanoma, and an increase in fecundity and fertility. Just to define, so fertility is how many babies you generally have. Fecundity is more how your ability to have children. So quality of sperm, quality of eggs, time to conception, that sort of thing. So when people talk about fertility and people say, the fertility rate of a country has gone down, that could just be everyone not wanting children. It doesn't mean they can't have children. Fecundity specifically is your ability to conceive. So they have all those positive effects. So what you've got here is actually an allele that has lots of positive effects but at the end of your life has a big negative effect. So you can start to think about biology in terms of these trade-offs, that some genes that make you healthy and fit early in life will have negative consequences. So how do you deal with that in terms of, okay, well, I want to be, I'm thinking about something like dementia, which progresses from early, the build-up of the matter that then ultimately leads to the death of the neurons occurs over many decades. At what stage of your life to go, actually, I don't want that gene to be doing the good bits anymore. I want to get rid of it so I don't get the bad bits. So really understanding those life histories of individuals and how the genes have positive and negative effects can start to show us the many trade-offs within biology, which will make it very difficult for us to pick the right path to 150 and 200.
Okay, so this is kind of like the more personalised approach where you're looking at the individual, the risk variants that they carry, obviously sort of carries over with a lot of the work that we do here at FitnessGenes, as opposed to kind of this longevity movement where perhaps it's more, I guess, sort of more generic advice in terms of it's not looking at the risks of the individual. So in terms of like organising this information and when you're encountering sort of, content put out by longevity gurus, how do you kind of read that when it looks quite scientifically sound but may not be underpinned by scientific accuracy?
So I guess 2 points. One is deal with data in a longitudinal way. What that means is information that you get when you're younger may not be applicable for when you're older. So let's think about caloric restriction or IGF-1. So calorific restriction, we know, is positive for longevity. But you would not tell a young person to restrict calories because they're growing. Why? Because calories can help drive growth, muscle growth of all the organs and tissues. So there's an example of when you're young, a piece of advice doesn't count, but maybe when you're slightly older, it's worth thinking about. Now let's think about this in a slightly different way. When if you're incredibly strong and lean versus if you are underweight and have little muscle mass. Actually, calorie restriction for the second person is not ideal, because what does calorie restriction do? It drives processes like autophagy. So autophagy is where the certain organelles within the body will degrade proteins that are damaged, and this has got a lot of attention with dementia because you have these aggregates of proteins, and autophagy can remove them. But it also breaks down muscle, the process of autophagy. So there's an example of where caloric restriction can drive neuroprotective effect, but it also can drive muscular atrophy. There's another, so you're starting to think about these in terms of the broader context of your biology, which can be both your sort of physical well-being, but also what time you are in your life. The second point is looking at your inherent risks. So as we're talking about these trade-offs, diseases can actually be diametric. So what do I mean here? If you think about, so we've got genetic variants in our system. So one that's associated with an increased protection against norovirus, which is a sickness and vomiting bug infection.
My result was more prone to norovirus, so I'm being careful with hygiene and that type of thing.
Yeah, however, because again, there's an immune response that's associated with that protection against infection, increases your risk of conditions such as Crohn's disease and also type 1 diabetes, which are autoimmune related. So there's a prime example. So there's a great example of you may have increased immunity, which is beneficial for living longer, but actually you have a decreased so you have an increased rate of autoimmunity, which can be life limiting. Now, a lot of autoimmune conditions, people can live normal length lives, but when you start to extend that life for 50 or 100 years, it's going to be a lot more complicated than that. Cancer and dementia are another what we class as diametric disease, where you think about what happens in the brain is you get the death of neurons. So so your inability of your brain, and we talked about in previous podcasts where regions of the hippocampus still have neurogenesis, you can get increased cell divisions. This can support a healthier brain. Running, for example, promotes this cell division that enables you to have more neurons created and potentially more neural connections that impact cognitive reserve. Cancer is a disease of cell proliferation. So for dementia, cell proliferation is protective. In cancer, cell proliferation is the underlying cause of the disease. So again, you've got these different. So what you've got to do is understand your risks at any moment in time and adapt your lifestyle according to those risks. So an example would be with hypercholesterolemia. There are very specific diets you need to go on to reduce your cholesterol, and you need to stick to those diets. Now, there's a list of foods there that you can look at another diet which is very healthy, but does not have any of those foods. So edamame, psyllium, soy in general, oat bran in particular. You can have a very healthy diet that doesn't have any of those components in. So in theory, in a high level sense, yes, you're on a really healthy diet. Well done, the doctor will say, congratulations. But actually, if you have hypercholesterolemia, you could be increasing your risk of a cardiovascular event because of not including those specific things. So it's really understanding your more broad risk profile that enables you then to target and understand these trade-offs and where do you put your energy. Because we have this, as you mentioned, this wealth of health data and information. If you just go onto any of the social media, you can be absolutely beaten to death by all this advice. And a lot of it on the pathway foundational level is useful. But actually, when you think of your personal context, it can be actually negative. And then you get all this infighting of, here's a paper which shows X works, here's a paper that shows X doesn't work. And you've really got to drill down with the, what's the cohort you're looking at, what's the context of it. A lot of things as well are done over short periods of time. And in terms of, and this is another problem with the longevity movement, is you have lots of these papers that look at either animal models or short-term studies that show these hallmarks of aging are reduced, but actually we really don't know what the long-term impact of it. And actually, if you're looking at this one readout, that it's have a positive effect, but some other effect in the body, which then is increasing the risk of a disease and therefore, in essence, aging, has been ignored within the study. So it's the complexity and understanding of the whole system that we need to get better at as biologists in general. And there's some great work going on there, but just to bring it back to the living to 100 or 200 at the moment, they do not understand. It's kind of the whack-a-mole game. We're smacking one mole down while the other two other pop up. That complexity and the lability of the system is where and why I put my chips on the side of pessimism at the moment, in terms of living to 100, 200, 300 and so on.
So yeah, and I guess that seems to be the takeaway, is that biology is a lot more complex and integrated than perhaps sort of this longevity movement is presenting. And it's not just a case of, follow this blueprint and you're going to live to 150. Strategies for health and wellness and fitness need to be a lot more personalised to individual risk factors. Is that the sort of summary?
For sure. And also reevaluation. So the one thing we do at FitnessGenes is we have lots of traits, but they have, for example, age, perimenopausal, postmenopausal, what's your BMI, how active are you, what family history. These things change the traits because this information can build that broader context that enables us to make better decisions and therefore give better health advice for the individual. And we're continuing to adapt the traits within the system. So this is something for me. I'm a neuroscience, but I come from a developmental biology background, and I really love the evolutional development component that enables me to think about all these different trade-offs. I find it quite interesting, and getting some of this into the product and enabling people to make decisions, not just so you don't come to FitnessGenes and look at it and then leave again. You come to FitnessGenes and then actually, as you go through a significant birthday or something's changed and you fill out your lifestyle data, the traits and the risk categories can change, and it's that constant evaluation. I think I'm going to do it a disservice because I forgot the author's name, but it's about how to make better predictions. The number one take home advice from the book was just reevaluation. It's constant reevaluation. New data, where do we sit now? New data, where do we sit now? And that's part of the patent awarded sort of framework that we built at FitnessGenes that enables us to adapt to an individual's context.
Okay, so not only is biology complex, but it's also constantly moving.
Yeah, for sure.
Which means it's quite hard to package sort of like personalized health into a nice sort of just marketable sort of like one-liner, because I think it sounds like it's much more, or needs to be much more detailed and personalized and individualized than perhaps it's being presented at the moment.
For sure. People are having a good go at packaging it into a one-liner, though, I've noticed.
Well, I was going to say, so what do we add to our website that says FitnessGenes members live by X more number of years? What are we going to start claiming ourselves?
Well, we're showing, so some of the studies we've done through the Innovate UK grants, we've shown people are moving the parameters of weight, lowering cholesterol, lowering blood sugar. So lots of those parameters are moving, but it's then how do you extract those differences to go, I'm going to enable you to live to 150. Now that's, so we're moving the dial well. It's just then how does that then lead to someone being 150 years of age and still popping to the shops and picking their grandkids or great grandkids up or great grandkids up? You know, it's that's the issue. There are other processes going on that ultimately are going to lead to the degeneration of the body, of the soma, so to speak.
Great. Well, I think we'll probably...
On a positive note.
Yeah. We'll wrap up on
Sorry about that.
but I mean, we were talking about traits at the top of the call, and I'm aware we've got some traits going live today. So our attention is needed elsewhere. But I appreciate your time, and thanks for sort of going into that level of detail. It's always interesting to listen to.
Cheers, Alex.
Awesome. Cheers, Stu. See you in a bit.